So I wanted to talk about something else this time. I read an article recently. It's kind of like given to me by Google in my kind of store. I think they call it stories or whatever. The suggested news items. The article was entitled "The Burnout Generation: Millennials and the Idea of Working All the Time." Something similar to that. I might have picked a couple words wrong. And the reason I want to talk about it is because it simultaneously makes a really good point while also being completely self-unaware of why people consider millennials and my generation to be like lazy and entitled, which is, it's a real unique situation because it makes both points very well. I think without trying, especially on the second one. So the initial point is that it kind of talks about the idea of that the job market for millennials and kind of just, the current generation of younger people is not really ideal. It talks about how a lot of us went to college, came out expecting the world, and are now finding that the jobs available are both low-paying, uninspired, and just genuinely not what was expected. It also goes on to talk about how technology has changed the job market, and so now a lot of people, and this is kind of, and it did admit that this is not unique to millennials, but a lot of people now work pretty much all the time with cell phones and email and text messaging. You're almost always on. I know for my job, I am. Work-related emails go straight to my phone. My employees constantly text and call me for, usually dumb shit. And it's part of the job. Part of the job is to interpret their dumb shit, interpret those problems, have quick answers. But it's also about setting boundaries. Don't call me at home at night after this time unless, shit's on fire. And it doesn't personally stress me out. That's part of the job. I think that's also related to the fact that my job pays well enough to justify it. I could imagine if I was making like, $30,000 a year, punching, 40 plus hours in the business and then also going home and having to deal with it. I could see that being a little more stressful. So the article then goes on to talk about the author's grandmother or great-grandmother, I don't quite remember, but basically said she was, grew up a black single mom, raised 12 kids, and then grandkids on top of that, worked to pay all the bills, and also tended a farm because that was one of their main sources of food. And here's where this is where the disconnect occurs. Because she kind of gets into it talking about the history of self-reliance, and I don't know, maybe I missed a major portion of the article. I don't think I did. But it goes on to talk about, her grandmother and her mother and how she's growing up now in this generation and feeling burnout constantly and not realizing that the reason that millennials like her, like a lot of people, feel burnout is because they have the ability to do so. She talked about her grandmother being referred to as boss because, she was in charge, she was single, raised the whole family, raised a whole fleet of kids, and, so she made the rules and she controlled the roost. So she was referred to as boss. And I'm sitting there thinking, it's like the reason your grandma never complained about burnout is because she didn't have the option. She had to keep going or people would die. I think that's true for especially our grandparents' generation. And I think a bit of our parents. I think there is kind of that baby boomer Gen X thing where it's just their lives have been fairly comfortable, and I think that's kind of one of the good points the author's trying to make, is that this, while a lot of Gen X and baby boomers have similar jobs to those that millennials do, the level of comfort is much different. And that level of comfort makes things a little more tolerable, which is absolutely true. I think that's a very good and very fair point to make. A lot of that is related to compensation and I think a level of certainty about the future. I think a lot of millennials feel uncertain about their future because, you went to college to get a basket weaving degree because everybody in your life told you, you're really passionate about basket weaving, you should go to college and get a degree in basket weaving and you'll be the best basket weaver ever. And that was the kind of dumb shit we were kind of force-fed while in high school and even, earlier. I know I was. And I pursued a degree in a field that does not pay. And doesn't really need the degree either. Practical experience would have done me worlds better. Would have saved me all the money, and it would have furthered my career probably more than the years of college did. I think when you compare this to the generations that came before us, Gen X and the baby boomer generation, them going to college, it was if you went to college, came out and graduated, you were guaranteed a good job. That's for the most part. I'm not going to say it's an absolute truth, but it's pretty true. A lot of that is because of the saturation of college degrees nowadays. It's kind of the Incredibles, the Incredible syndrome, or if everybody has something, nobody has it. To the point where it's actually becoming, not having a college degree is actually becoming a benefit. My wife does not have a college degree, and she's got a fantastic job. She's very high up in her company, and she's under the age of 30. And I think a lot of that is because she didn't go to college. Rather than, she'd be coming out of college right around now. She was working and gaining practical hands-on experience. And I think it also reduces the level of entitlement she has to what she expects she deserves in the job market. Because had she come out with no experience, she would not be able to walk into the same job that she has because it requires a lot of working knowledge specific to this company and the industry. Now, this industry knowledge you can get in college, but the company knowledge you cannot. So it's fascinating how I look at my generation, and on one hand you can talk about how, grandma raised 12 kids and did everything by herself and paid all the bills and made sure we were all fed and this and that. She doesn't know how hard it is that, it's nowadays, my cell phone goes off occasionally. Even if your cell phone goes off all the time, our lives are extremely more comfortable than our grandparents, and especially our great-grandparents. I think there's also a bit of a kind of a dopamine issue that a lot of people suffer with regarding what makes you feel good and what doesn't. I think social media tends to alter the perception of a lot of millennials and make it so things that should make you happy don't. Because I think an example I've used to explain this to people before is pizza's pretty good. Everybody likes pizza. The idea of, hey, let's get pizza for dinner. Usually that's going to make 99% of people happy. Yeah, I love pizza. All right, let's get pizza. I'm about it. But nowadays what happens is, let's order some Domino's. I like Domino's is, it's my favorite delivery brand. I think they do a good job. It's cheap, it's affordable, it's convenient. So let's order some Domino's, right? Cool. So, as, a grumpy old man in a young body, I don't use Instagram or anything, but then my wife will start searching pizza on Instagram. Why? Because, she's just got pizza on the brain now, excited for her pizza to come. And now she starts getting pictures and posts of, these fantastic, high-quality pizza places and how good the pizza looks, and It's a picture of somebody eating pizza on the beach in Italy and drinking wine at the same time. And so that becomes the expectation. That's now the mental image associated with eating pizza for dinner, is just this over-the-top, lifestyle. And it's really just eating pizza. That's the whole point. That's how we got here, is eating pizza. And now the pizza that we got, which is pretty good, is no longer as good because it's not that pizza on that beach with that wine. And she doesn't look like that girl who's nice and skinny and all this and that. And so now what should have been, hey, pizza for dinner, I love pizza, awesome, is now soured because it's being compared to something else, something unrealistic. I think the reason a lot of millennials seem unhappy compared to the older generations is the older generations didn't have that. You're having pizza for dinner? Awesome, we're having pizza for dinner. Let me think about pizza. Pizza. And that's as far as it went. You thought about the last time you got pizza, and it was great. Now it's being compared to, and it's, I don't remember where I read it, but it was an article kind of talking about the social media-based depression and how it's, this is a real true thing. And it's because we're comparing our day-to-day lives to the highlight reels of the world. Because the shit that gets top on social media, especially things like Instagram and other similar, like I guess Twitter and Facebook too. Facebook not so much, it's gated behind who you know. I think Instagram's specific level of poison comes from the fact that you're not following people you know, so the general content is not at least somewhat grounded. It's you can follow anybody doing anything, and now you have these entire slew of people known as influencers, quote unquote, whose job is to live basically extravagantly and then document it. What I was saying, it's early. Not sure if anybody's realized I'm recording this driving to work at 4 in the morning. So bear with me. So what happens is your life is compared to, it's not just the best of people's lives. That's what you get on Facebook. It's you're comparing your life to the best of your friends because nobody posts their day-to-day on Facebook. Nobody gets up and says, cold pizza for breakfast again. It's some people may. But for the most part, no. It's when you post about pizza on Facebook, it's, we went to this really nice Italian restaurant that just opened up in town. All right, fair enough. But that still doesn't unbase your delivery pizza that much. It just kind of changes, look, there's a new delivery place now. There's a new pizza place now. We should try that one day. But when you get on something like Instagram, which again connects you to these quote-unquote influencers they just basically they live just like a Roman bacchanalia. That's their entire existence. It's just indulgence, over the top, always. And just extreme superficiality. And so that's what so it's like you're taking the top 1% of, people who have good times. That's the only people that, you're getting exposed to, and then it's just their good times. It's not them, it's, you see them drinks, this and that, tequila, yeah, shots, bob, party, woo. But you don't see the hungover next day throwing up in the toilet looking like a hot fucking mess. You just see 5 days later the same thing. Party shots, this, that, going out, So it's, again, you miss the bad parts. And I think it's this exposure to the idea that everything's supposed to be good always, combined with a very high level of relative comfort, is where you kind of get points of view like the author of this article, where it's like millennials are burning out because and the point of it is that you have the option to be burned out. You have the comfort to go, man, I don't want to do this anymore. Wish I could do something else. Or your boss, your great grandmother raising all these kids and literally having to work the land for food, doesn't have that option. She can't sit back and go, man, I wish I didn't have to do all that. Why? Because she's had kids now. A lot of them. She has, a limited amount of skills because the level of personal education just doesn't exist it didn't exist back then. You can't jump on, line and begin, the novice level education to start to, decide what it is you want to do with your life. She developed a handful of skills as a young person, and then had to develop those as an adult, and that became what she gets paid for, whatever that may be. And chances are she's not going to branch out from that at all ever again. Which probably goes into why part of the boss's job was to work the family farm in order to raise food, because that was A, one of the skills she learned as a young person, and B, it was a way to supplement, the limited ability for income that she had. Nowadays, no, those aren't problems. Abundance is everywhere. You're able to go get whatever it is that you want for the most part. I see it every day. People who, I look at them in my line of work, spending money that they probably don't have to spend on shit they don't need, that is inherently flippant for them to do so. Why? Because they can. They're the same ones that'll complain about being broke. I think that's a universality, that people, if you pay enough attention, the people who complain about being broke the most are the ones that spend money on the dumbest shit. And I was one of them for a long time. I remember when I decided that I was going to put into place the plan that, allowed us to save up and buy our house. It was because I literally was printing off monthly bank statements, going through, sort of circling stuff that I considered to be unnecessary, or not, that I knew was unnecessary. Money spent eating out, money spent, going out, money spent on, entertainment that we didn't need because we had entertainment at home. And I realized that we were spending hundreds of dollars a month ostensibly on things we didn't need to spend it on. And I get that kind of revelation, stepping back and realizing this is where all our money is going. This is why it feels like we're always broke. Why every time we have savings, I end up having to drain the savings account to go pay for another bill that cropped up. It's because we're spending, $500 a month on shit we don't need. So once I cut out those expenditures, I looked at my wife and said, look, we're not going to go out to eat anymore. We're going to buy groceries and cook our own food. We're going to I'm going to cook one big meal, and then we're going to just eat that for a few days, and then repeat the process, again and again and again. And, this will save us lots of money, and it did. We started saving, I think it was $400 a month. And that adds up quick. $400 a month solid for a year, that's a lot of money. And sure enough, after a year and a half, we had the down payment for a house. And before that revelation that we were just kind of expending so much money on excess, it would have seemed completely. If you said I could save, $5,000 in a year, I would have told you you're insane. There's no way. I don't have that kind of extra money. But sure enough, we did. And again, I complained about being broke. And the point was, I had the ability to complain. That's, I think a lot of people who are legitimately, genuinely poor, they kind of talk about, there's this kind of romanticization of poverty and being poor that occurs in the Western world with, but look how happy they are. And it's because that's all they can really focus on. When you're actually poor and actually impoverished, you don't really, it doesn't do you any good to focus on the negative things. And B, what's good is much more impactful. You'll see a picture of some little kid in a third world country, clothed in rags, eating a Reese's cup, and he's just as happy as could be. And you're like, look how appreciative and happy this kid is. I'm like, that's because it's literally the best thing in his life. That Reese's cup is the best thing that's ever happened to him. Everything else sucks, so the good is much better. Does that mean that we should all live like that? Of course not. But I think in general, a lot of millennials need to kind of step back. And I don't want to use demeaning terms like you need to appreciate what it is that you have. But I think there's a concept of needing to step back and realize how good things are, how much better they could be, and realize that what we consider to be bad maybe isn't all that bad. And I do want to kind of follow that up with saying one of the things I do hate the most, though, is when somebody is suffering through something personal that's, a personal problem to them, and then somebody's like, well, it could be worse. They're starving people in Africa. That kind of argument that I think a lot of us got as kids, starving people in Africa. That is not a good mentality, I don't think. Because just because something that you find to be uncomfortable, unpleasant, and dislike really isn't a big deal doesn't mean it should be completely written off. I think that's not necessarily a good thing. But I think that specifically comes from the fact that when something's written off, it's written off by somebody else. You can't write off your own discomfort, because if you write off your own discomfort, you're having kind of the revelation that it's not a discomfort. So if that in itself solves the problem. So if you write it off, you're realizing that, it could be worse, and that will kind of solve you feeling upset and sad about it, right? It's when somebody else comes in and says, it could be worse, it could be starving people in Africa, you could live in a third world country, that doesn't solve anything. I think what's important is to help people get to the point where they solve it themselves. And so again, you look at the millennials, the burnout generation, again, it's because your life is so comfortable that you have the ability to feel burnout. You don't have there's the option, and I think it's what's important here is that burnout goes hand in hand with this idea that there is a better, different option. But I also think a lot of millennials are scared to pursue that option, and that's where a lot of this comes from. There's this idea that you just kind of have to trudge and just do what you do. I think there's also an argument there, though, that millennials also have a bad habit of not building a plan of action on how to change things. This is a conversation I've had with a few people my age, a little younger, a little older, about planning for how you're going to overcome obstacles and what you're going to do to get to where you want to be.